Hey everyone, thank you for watching Fight Talk. In this video, we'll take a look at the matchup between King Green and Paddy Pimblett for UFC 304 in Manchester, England on July 27th, 2024. So let's start with Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. Pimblett grew up in Liverpool and developed an interest in martial arts at a young age. He started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when he was 15, made his professional MMA debut in 2012 at the age of 17, but he made his amateur debut at 16 years old. He fought for various regional promotions in the UK, gaining experience and building his reputation, most notably in Cage Warriors. He's a second-degree black belt under Paul Rimmer, former FCC featherweight champ, Cage Warriors featherweight champion, and he competed for but lost the vacant Cage Warriors lightweight championship. King Green overcame a tough childhood in foster care among other hardships and tragedies before becoming a professional fighter in 2008. With a background in high school wrestling, he made his mark in promotions like King of the Cage and Strikeforce before joining the UFC in 2013. I highly recommend checking out this Origins video by the UFC if you're unfamiliar with his story. King Green is one of the OGs in the sport that have a fun style, and I rank among my favorite must-see fighters to watch. There are so many high-level opponents he's faced inside and outside of the UFC, whether it's a win or a loss. One of my all-time favorite fights, and one worth watching if you haven't seen it, is Green's fight with Lando Venata, and the rematch too, but the first one is even better. Green is 37 years of age. Sources say he stands 5'10" with a 71-inch reach, and his professional record is 32-15-1. Paddy is 29. Sources say he's 5'10", but his frame appears to be much larger, with a 73-inch reach with a pro record of 21-3. Paddy's two main advantages are his grappling skills and his chin. Also, he's usually the bigger fighter, especially when he was at featherweight. Early in his career, his main tools were his kicks to close the distance, his takedowns from scrambles, or the cage, and the occasional double leg or single leg takedown. No matter how outmatched he is on the feet, he usually manages to get the victory in some fashion, usually by submission, which he has 9 victories by. He has 6 wins by KO, TKO, and 6 by decision, but 2 of those decisions I disagree with. In an ideal scenario, Paddy secures a body triangle and works ground and pound, or gets a submission, usually a rear naked choke, or he'll secure the round by keeping the body triangle and controlling his opponent on the ground. He also has a couple of sneaky triangle chokes or triangle arm bars, whether it's flying or not. What a consistent weakness is his stand-up, and from the very beginning, he is most susceptible to the left hook. I've watched all of his fights, and there are a lot of them where he's clipped by the left hook, but in general, he gets hit by most punches and kicks. But you have to give Paddy credit. He has a very solid chin. He has been dropped quite a few times in his fights, but there's one fight where he was really visibly wobbled, and that came from a flying knee from Julian Erosa. And I want to take a second to talk about the Erosa fight because this is one fighter that was taller with longer limbs. Erosa keeps his hands down and he'll taunt and he'll gesture quite similar to King Green. Though the styles are very, very different, Erosa had a lot of success in that fight, so much so that I thought he won that fight. Although there isn't much data on the fight, MMAdecisions.com shows that a few media outlets also agree that Erosa won the 5-round Cage Warriors featherweight championship. However, the judges disagree. Paddy definitely had success on the feet, but there is no question Erosa did the most damage and hurt Paddy several times. Definitely enough to secure 3 rounds. But this was a good experience for Paddy, especially now that he's facing a similar taunting style with the arms down like King Green does. Side note, against decent wrestlers, Paddy has shown that he can be controlled and mounted as well, but that hasn't happened too often. Paddy started taking the strength and conditioning aspect of his MMA fights much more seriously closer to his UFC debut. He trades a high chin and low hands for explosivity and counter hooks. And even though it isn't a good look and certainly not good for his overall health, he makes it work by landing his own shots, but also tying up and getting the fight to the mat. Paddy is good off his back and on top, and that is ultimately where he does his best work. In his recent fights, it's worth noting that he is a little better with his footwork, sitting down on his punches, a better understanding of timing, more varied attacks. He understands his own range a little bit more, mostly offensively, still not defensively, but ultimately he is still wide open to nearly any strike headed his way. And I'll definitely say that when he does land his strikes, his opponents feel it. He has power, he can do damage. It's just finding the openings through feints and setups that are still elusive to him. And that can be a good thing too, because he is a little unorthodox and unpredictable as a result. The last fight I'd like to touch on is Paddy's fight with Jared Gordon. It's clear that Gordon's camp did their research, and I think they did a great job reviewing all of Paddy's fights, because the one thing they were absolutely looking for was a left hook and follow-up shots. I think it's fair that most fighters who do any kind of fight study will find that opening, plus pretty much any other opening if they can effectively close the distance. Gordon, although he had his own struggles in that fight, put together a very competent game plan and I think won that fight against Paddy. And out of 22 media outlets noted on MMAdecisions.com, all 22 scored that fight for Gordon. I scored the fight for Gordon in real time and retrospectively. So in my opinion, that marks 2 losses for Paddy. And if this fight gets any kind of trivial with grappling exchanges or Paddy does some damage on the feet, we may see this fight way in Paddy's favor on the scorecards, because we never know, obviously, but that's something to be aware of. Judges suck. What King Green excels at is counter-striking, a nice balance of being offensive enough to draw the opponent in and countering with straight punches, while keeping that right hand loaded, either with the straight right or a hook. He has some sneaky left hook counters too. He has a great variety of kicks, and not much tells when he throws a leg kick. He will stand orthodox and lean forward. When his opponent presses forward, he'll backstep into southpaw, throw straight left, or vice versa. What Paddy will struggle with most, despite his small step forward and understanding range, is knowing where Green is going to be. And as far as grappling, Green is slippery. Sound defensively and offensively. He will engage in a clinch and even go for takedowns, usually successfully. If someone isn't relentless or opportunistic enough to find a throw, chain takedowns, take away his post, or secure hooks, Green is likely going to find a way out. But there is another advantage that Green has, and I think that's his cardio. Round over round, Green is much more consistent with his output. And when Paddy gets tired, it is very noticeable. In the 3rd round, I think we can see that in the Ferguson fight, but there are a number of fights you can go back to. He gets tired in the later rounds. Will that be changed now with his better strength and conditioning? I'm kind of unsure about that, but it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the longer the fight goes, it probably weighs in Green's favor. Now I want to talk about Green's fight against Tony Ferguson. What I really liked about that fight is Green was consistently attacking the legs and immediately following up with punches. He always timed Ferguson coming in and kicked the legs, and it really gave him trouble and he couldn't figure out how to get past it. I think Green can definitely employ some of that strategy in this fight, where you're just trying to stifle any entry that Paddy is trying to do when he tries to get inside the range. I think this is a great matchup, and I think the UFC did it right. Paddy has been winning fights, and we are throwing him up to a very tough, tricky veteran. In theory, Paddy shows weakness and comes through on top. The UFC is truly testing him against a crafty veteran. So far in some of the interviews I've seen, fighters are choosing Green to win this fight, and I think on paper this makes sense. However, this is a 3-round fight, and I think Paddy is more unpredictable than he has ever been. I think King will definitely find his openings, but do I think he can avoid and outwork Paddy in every scramble? He should be able to, but Paddy is going to charge forward and cause chaos with Green until he can get this wrapped up in a clinch. Paddy has recently shown a decent hip toss in his arsenal too. It's just whether or not Paddy can control Green once his butt hits the ground. Alright, to summarize, Green needs to find the fine line of pressure but not getting in the clinch. Green is very good at this, and I think will find a ton of success in that range. If Green can draw out the attacks and land counters, pivot, use lateral movement, I think he's going to get a decision. But I think it needs to be an undeniable decision. I think there needs to be respect to the size of Paddy Pimblett, his chin, he has youth on his side, he has enough striking just to be dangerous, and I think given the right opportunity, can possibly control Green on the ground too. I lean in favor of Green to win this fight, but I don't see a finish happening, so you'll have to decide on your own if you trust the judges to score it for Green if it happens to be close. Or maybe it doesn't have to be close. We saw what happened with Julian Erosa and Jared Gordon. So this is going to be a tricky one if it hits the scorecards. I'm leaning in favor of Green to win this fight. I appreciate you watching. Thank you.